Welcome to Sacred Realms. It's a great day in Hyrule, y'all. Welcome to Sacred Realms, a Zelda Retrospective Podcast. I am your host, Lyndon Willoughby, joined as always by my co-host, Matt Willoughby. Matt, how you doing tonight?
I am hot, and it is muggy and gross, and I'm pretty sure there's a mosquito buzzing around in here somewhere that I'm going to try to kill at some point. So if you hear a loud clapping noise, it's just me terminating insects.
Thanks for the heads up on that, Matt.
Yeah.
It's not Texas's greatest time of the year right now.
No, it's not.
85 degrees and humid is, I don't think, anybody's favorite. So
no, unless you live in like the swamps and that's what you really enjoy, which if you do, then more power to you. I'd like to understand your frame of mind and the way you go about life. But
I'm sure it's beautiful there.
Sure, why not? Other than that, I'm good. We're coming off of Memorial Day weekend, and it was a very fun, not relaxing weekend. We had a slate full of activities. We went to a Taylor Swift DJ night with our significant others, which was interesting and fun.
Some of us had a little bit more fun than others.
Yes, that is true.
Look, you and Jackson you are enablers, and
that's true.
And I'm just very happy that my wife was gracious enough to assume designated driver duties for the evening.
Well, that was a misstep on your part.
That was
more than a little bit.
That was my bad. Sorry, y'all. But the spirit of Swift got into me.
That's a hard one to shake. Even
it's
though
a hard one
you,
to shake it off.
I was gonna go there. You beat me to it. Fine. Gosh. All right. Well, now I've done my Taylor Swift bit for the night, and my fiance can be happy. And then, just into a long weekend of pool and family and grilled meats of various kinds, and just a good time all around.
We did. We opened the pool this weekend, and man, that is just such a magical weekend. Memorial Day is about the latest that we ever do it, and it was great. I was jonesing for some pool time. It really hit the spot, and we got the kiddo in, and he was really enjoying it. So
pool nuggie is the best nuggie, in my opinion. He really does thrive.
I mean, I don't have like favorites, but it was cute.
Yes.
It was cute.
He's adorable. It was really fun. We had a good weekend. We are, I think, both kind of exhausted because we're now old, and doing things like that all weekend instead of sleeping and recharging does take its toll. So
yep, old we are. You're correct. But still, not too many reasons to complain other than the fact that we probably just haven't been playing quite as much Tears of the Kingdom as we would like to be playing.
That is so accurate. I feel like I've played a bit. I feel like I want to be playing about half again as much as I am, just because I just want to dig into every part of this game that I possibly can. And I'm constantly... because I'm trying to do some specific things right now. I've completed the memories, and I'm trying to then go through and I filled out the map today, and now I want to go visit some points of interest that I haven't been to yet. But every time I try to go do something, it is just the ultimate game of, oh my gosh, look over there, that's something cool. I'm trying to travel to a new area, either via the sky or on my horse, and invariably within 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, that looks cool. I think I want to go check that out, and then spend half an hour to an hour not doing what I originally intended to do, and then sometimes even forgetting what I originally intended to do.
Sure. Yeah. No, samesies. Definitely been my experience as well, and I'm going to have a lot more to say about that, and especially talk about some of the things that have been distracting me from the things that I set out to do whenever I log into this game. Before I talk more about my experience, before we talk more about your experience with this game, Matt, I am pleased to introduce our guest for the evening. Y'all know him, you love him. The one and only Mr. Max Nichols has joined us to talk about Tears of the Kingdom. Max, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Really excited to be back and chatting on this momentous occasion of a new Zelda launch.
I know that we had in the lead up to the launch of this game, there was some uncertainty about, because I know you've been very diligent in kind of your spoiler dodging, right?
Oh yeah.
As you should be, because I mean, how often do we get a game of this magnitude? Let alone a Zelda game. I mean, this is an event, and I feel like it's not one that you want to. You don't want to ruin your experience, or you don't want to discover something via the internet that would have been better and more enjoyably discovered through actual gameplay. So it's completely understandable. That being said, I was definitely happy that after only 3 weeks on the market, we're all kind of feeling like, okay, we've played enough to where we have a pretty good sense for the kind of conversation that we can have without like ruining bits of game for each other.
Yeah, we've passed that like every mechanic is a new revelation period, and now we're on to like, okay, we know the shape of this game, we know how it goes. Now all we need to do is avoid specifics, story moments and stuff, and we're good.
Yeah. And like, that's full disclosure, that is the reason that I went straight for the memories, because I knew that like those would be making their way around the Twitterverse and everything else in a much more difficult to avoid way. Like, especially now that we're 3 weeks in, I knew that all that stuff was going to start popping up, and I did not want anyone to tell me anything that I didn't find out for myself. So that is the sole reason that I just went straight. I think last week I dedicated 4-ish hours and did everything related to the memories and the story up to where I'm at in the game now. Because I did not want any of that to get ruined for me. And I'm very glad that I did. It's a very rewarding system of storytelling that I think was really great in Breath of the Wild, and I think they even improved upon in Tears of the Kingdom. So I'm very glad that I did that. And I highly recommend to anybody who doesn't want that kind of stuff spoiled for them to kind of make that a priority. Before it gets
the Zelda version of defensive driving.
Exactly. Yeah. You gotta safeguard yourself, because not anyone's gonna do it for you. So, and no one cares about your feelings on the internet, generally speaking. So, do it for yourself.
Man, that's a good rule of thumb just for life in the year of our Lord 2023.
Yeah, true.
So I hear you're getting a lot of new listeners. Big surge because of the big new Zelda game.
Yes, it's been a lot of fun.
Which is already the second best selling Zelda game of all time, by the way. Beat Ocarina of Time.
Wow, that's crazy.
Anyway, what was I saying? Right. Should I reintroduce myself? I haven't done that in a long time on the podcast.
I think that would probably be a good idea. Yeah, we've definitely had kind of an influx of new folks, and
almost 1,000 a week.
Yeah, and we're obviously, we love that. We love that y'all are here. You're on this same journey with us, and this is a little bit different format than you're usually catching us trying to do, but definitely a unique moment in time. And so, definitely got to celebrate that. But to all of you listening, Max is one of our recurring, one of our most frequently featured voices. And I'm going to give him a moment here real quick just to tell you about himself before we dive into this thing.
Yeah. So I'm a professional game designer. Currently, I am a senior activity designer working at Bungie. So I help make, missions and combat encounters and that sort of thing. I've taught some, game design classes at the college level, including world design. And I'm a longtime kind of Zelda community contributor. Like, I used to run a fan site 20 years ago, and these days I run a website called Hyrule Interviews, which is just a database of every interview I can find with anyone who has ever worked on a Zelda game. I've got like 1,000 of them now. Now that Matt Mercer is worked on a Zelda game, I'm wrestling with the question of, do I need to go put every episode of Critical Role in my database? But yeah, so I'm super into Zelda. That's the reason I'm a game designer. So I love coming on here and chatting about it. It's highlight of my month every time.
Well, we love having you, and you always bring a wonderful, fresh perspective and a professional perspective. So that's kind of the main selling point of the Max episodes, is getting some deep dive knowledge that is hard to get elsewhere. So
yeah, there's a reason that the first episode we ever had Max on was the Ocarina of Time Water Temple episode, right? It's like, we feel like we need professional opinions about this one, and we got them. So There you go. Man, I want to go back and listen to that one sometime.
That was a fun episode.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. I actually listened to it probably, I don't know, like 6 months ago or something. And it was still fun. Still a fun listen.
Although I think my favorite Max episode was the Nehru sand ship in Skyward Sword, where we got to talk about the transition mechanics of sand to water and the boat and all that. That was a crazy fun one.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of somewhat of a prophetic moment, right? Because much as many people working in games right now are staring at a Zelda game trying to figure out how exactly they did that, that was kind of a similar moment in which we're kind of looking at the water to sand, moment to moment transition and just saying like, huh, that's interesting. Wonder what went into that.
Yep.
Yeah, I had a hard time explaining it all. I had to pull in a technical artist friend to help me understand it.
Well, this whole game is basically that repeated ad infinity. Like, how did they do this? This is just magic. Like, there's no way that this is possible, but it is in front of me. So it's obviously possible, but yeah, it's wild.
I mean, this is going to be...
Tears of the Kingdom is a technical marvel in a number of different ways. It's kind of just bonkers what they have accomplished in this game on the Switch at a smoother frame rate than Breath of the Wild had. Tracking the physics history for 30 seconds of every single object in the scene, which Breath of the Wild didn't have to do. So they must have done some crazy optimization since Breath of the Wild.
Yeah. I mean, these are all the things that I can't wait to talk a little bit more about. And one of the reasons that I really felt that it was important to have you specifically on for this kind of stretch of bonus episodes where we just kind of freewheel about this game for the first time. Well, I tell you guys what I really want to do is get into some housekeeping, get it out of the way. That way we can just dive straight into this conversation without any further impediments. So with that being said, if you didn't know, Sacred Realms is a weekly re-examination of The Legend of Zelda, one little slice at a time. Sacred Realms drops every Wednesday and is available on all major podcast networks. Every week we play a new section of a Zelda game and then we sit down here to talk and to drop our hot takes. If that sounds fun to you, please head over to Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, and be sure to leave us a review. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated, and they have a chance to get a shout out here on the show. If you want more Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/sacredrealmspod to get access to our Discord channel, listener mail, vote on what game we play next, and so much more. Additionally, one of the benefits that Master Sword patrons and above get is that we read their names every week here on the show. Those legendary individuals are William, Connor, Shepherd Street, Matthew, Chris, Daniel, Fallout 907, Kelso, Tiffany the Star, Daxel, Patrice, Stephanie, Darknook, Brian, George, Mike, Dylan, Lennon, Melanie, Kolku, Aiden, Rowan, Josh, Nick, Dante, Gep, Brittany, Davey, Haru the Mighty, Derek, Albert, Mark, Andy, Cameron, Ben, Daniel, Nick D_TV, Travis, Christian, Jonathan, Hyrule Interviews, aka your guest of the evening, Garrett, and Drew. These are the most legendary of individuals. They are truly wonderful people, and I don't know what's a good one, Matt. I'm gonna let you think of the one this week. You never get to do this.
But this is your favorite part. This is your favorite part of it.
Yeah, I know, but I want you to do one, and then I'm gonna sit over here and be critical of whatever you say.
I would gladly go into any challenge shrine with nothing but my undergarments and whatever the game throws at me with any of these people.
There you go. That's good.
Yeah,
that's really good.
I like that one.
I don't think they would probably want to go in there with you.
No. I mean, nobody wants to see me in my undergarments. That's for sure. But look, if it was more of a modest clothing setting, no more protective, but maybe a little more covering, then I think everybody would be more comfortable anyway. So yeah.
What if it was just you in that toga that you get in the sky?
Oh, totally. I would totally do that.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. That sounds...
I'm so mad that you can't upgrade that toga.
I know. It's super disappointing.
Oh, you can't upgrade that at all?
No. It's just like the old, the ancient gear you get in Breath of the Wild. It's just permanently level 1. You can't do anything
That's really disappointing. That's one of my favorite outfits in the game.
You can't look like the Link from all the key art and all the advertisements.
Okay.
I mean, unless I'm going to unlock a better version of it in 20 hours or something, and I just haven't done that yet. So
that would be kind of nice.
Could happen. Who knows? But in the meantime, a little disappointing to hear, but that's okay. There's plenty of great outfits in this game. Alrighty, y'all. This is normally the section of the show where we would get into the Sacred Realms Rundown, which is a 6-part analysis of what we played and the feelings that it made us feel. This, however, is not a normal season of Sacred Realms. The Sacred Realms Rundown is on a break until we come back to talk about Phantom Hourglass sometime in the next few weeks. What we're going to do instead is to have a bit more of a freewheeling conversation about Tears of the Kingdom, as we've done over the last few weeks. And Max, I don't want to beat around the bush too much. I want to kick things over to you. And let's go ahead and start off with, no particular area of focus. I would just love to hear some of your first impressions generally about this game, and especially kind of how you were feeling about it when you picked it up for the first time, knowing so little about it.
Yeah, so I managed to go into it without even knowing that there were new abilities. I was expecting to launch into this game and get the same set of 4 abilities we had in Breath of the Wild, to be completely honest. So I had no idea that Ascend existed. I had no idea that the time reversal one existed. I definitely didn't expect anything like Ultra Hand's kind of crafting or the fuse system. So like I was getting my mind blown every couple minutes during those first opening hours of the game. It didn't quite feel as mind-blowingly new as Breath of the Wild did, of course. It didn't quite, I don't think it had any moment that hit as hard as looking out at the Great Plateau did that very first time 6 years ago. But, that's a high bar. I can forgive the game for not making me feel like a child for the first time in 20 years like Breath of the Wild did. But other than that tiny blight, or not blight, what's the saying? Whatever. Problem compared to Breath of the Wild, it was really an amazing couple hours when I was learning all these mechanics and seeing the sky for the first time and getting that big cutscene when you jump off, and the first time I jumped into a chasm expecting it to be, just an underground shrine, like some self-contained cave or something. And instead I got what I got. So it had those moments pretty frequently for me for those first couple hours, especially first 5 or 10 hours, still surprising me with dramatic revelations like that.
What to you was the most surprising of all of those things?
I think the thing that gave me the most was the most joyful surprise. Like I kind of had the biggest grin on my face was the first time I went into a chasm and realized the extent of what was down there.
Yeah.
I was not expecting it. I was not expecting a whole other, world's worth of landscape underground.
And I mean, did you realize, did you have a pretty good idea right off the bat that you were looking at an area that was roughly the size of the overworld above it? Or did it take you a minute? Were you still thinking that you'd fallen into something just a little bit more contained or segmented than that?
I had my, I spent a few minutes kind of thinking did they? No way. There's no way it's that big. And playing around, I could tell immediately that it was going to be a big recurring thing because it had this whole systems that they were teaching you about how it works, and mechanics they were showing me about how to navigate down there. It was clearly a big deal that was going to keep happening, but it wasn't until I lit up the first light route that I was like, wow, they did it. It is as big as Hyrule. Seeing it go to the map and seeing the Robbie say oh, this is corresponds to the shrine above it. I was like, oh crap, there's one of these for every shrine.
And that's what I was wondering, because it's tough to really get a sense of the scale of the depths until it kicks you to the map. And then, I mean, since you can kind of freely scroll between depths, surface, and sky, and it's all the same size map together, I think that's probably the biggest context clue for sure.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember this moment. I don't think you could scroll down to the depths on the map until you got the first light route. Maybe you could. I want to say they like activated that part of the menu when you scanned the first light route.
I didn't try, and to be completely honest, I don't think that I was really interacting with my map at all until quite a little ways after that, because I know some people kind of go off the beaten path once they get down to the surface for the first time, and I mean, famously, there's stories all over the internet of folks who didn't even try to go check out Lookout Landing. They just, like they hit the ground and then it's like off to Kakariko Village or off to like, Gerudo Town or
oh, that
whatever.
looks interesting. Something like 10 miles away on the horizon.
Right, exactly. So like we said last week, there's people who have played 50, 60 hours of this game and they don't even have the glider yet. So, which is incredible.
Oh boy. I didn't know. I didn't know if this game was going to have the glider. I went through the whole Great Sky Island or whatever it's called tutorial area. I didn't get the glider, and I like went down. I have a note written down. I was taking some notes, and one of my notes is like, "Does this game not have the glider?" Like 7 question marks. So I was like actually afraid I was never going to get a glider in this game, and they're going to replace it with like crafting mechanics.
Would you have been disappointed in that?
I would have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean. I don't know if we want to get into my thoughts on the crafting yet, but
no, I think maybe not quite yet. I will just say that I agree with you. I think the glider to me is one of those things that's so quintessential about a Breath of the Wild style Zelda game. The fact that this game is so inextricably linked to systems and the same specific like overworld of Breath of the Wild, I think it really would have felt. It would have felt like a removal of some some options for the player that would have felt not great.
The only world where they would have gotten rid of the glider is if they're replacing it with something else that fulfilled the same role from a different angle, probably.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously like an essential part of just the action ecosystem of this game. Yeah. Like imagine moving around this overworld without the glider, it would be miserable.
No, for sure. Or at least
I couldn't imagine what that would have been.
Yeah, I mean the only way I can imagine them having done it were the glider to not exist, I think there would have had to be a bit more density to the Sky Islands, right? Because at that point, fast travel to shrines in the sky would have been a much bigger mechanic, and then that just becomes like, okay, now the main traversal mechanic is just free falling from the Sky Islands to the overworld.
So yeah, I didn't know to what extent crafting was going to be like the main activity or not of this game. Like there's a bunch of interviews where like both Eiji Aonuma and Hidemaru Fujibayashi, they're the producer and director respectively of this game, have talked about how they were inspired by Minecraft and Terraria when they're making Breath of the Wild. Which you can see that influence clear as day in this game. So there was a part of me that was like half wondering if this was going to be just a full-fledged crafting is what you're doing in this game at all times. I had not seen anything.
Can I just say that I hate that Notch has that satisfaction?
Yeah, that guy is
who's
pure
Notch?
Trash. He's the alt-right creator of Minecraft.
Oh, ooh, that's not a great look for anybody.
Yeah, he's a billionaire. I think he bought like Beyonce's old house or something. But yeah, luckily he's disappeared from public view for the most part. So I'll take the wins where I can get them.
Anyway. Yeah, I think we can all be very glad that this did not just turn into Zelda the crafting simulator. And I personally, I don't know, Max, if you would agree or disagree here, but that's kind of what I'm looking for you to answer is, do you think that it is well implemented from a density perspective? Like, is it too crafting heavy? Is it not crafting heavy enough, et cetera, et cetera?
Now that's entirely a matter of taste. I I think they probably hit a good balance for trying to appeal to different player types. So full disclosure, as a player, I'm the kind of player who I build the shortest, simplest bridge I can make to get where I want to go. I don't spend a lot of time playing with the Lego pieces to make stuff unless it's in service of a goal. Like if I'm trying to get somewhere, I'll make what I need to get there. I kind of don't necessarily enjoy crafting extravagant things just for the sake of crafting them.
So you have not made a Gundam yet.
I have not made a Gundam. And like I'm not one of the people who's going and figuring out like what's the limits of what I can do with the crafting systems. I'm not like making videos for TikTok because I'm not that kind of player. The crafting is a tool in service of the other stuff I care more about. So for me, I occasionally feel like there's too much crafting. Like for my personal taste, like I'm like, another Korok where I need to build a extravagant vehicle to get across a chasm to get him to his friend. And I'm not always excited about that.
That's fair.
But I think it was probably the right call for them overall. Like if I had made this game, I would be ecstatic at the just vast legions of millions of people that are, being creative with these tools that I gave them. Like they're probably loving it so much that I'm worried that they're going to go even harder in that direction in the next Zelda game.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's very interesting about this is that I've seen quite a lot of people, and I actually consider myself one of those types of players, where they are not traditional fans of the crafting genre. The Minecraft of the world are not really their thing. Fans of games that are typically more linear, right? Where, even if there's like some deviation possible, it's mostly just like you're still more or less being kind of funneled along an overarching path, right? And that's one of the reasons that I like so many of the more recent 3D Zelda games previous to Breath of the Wild, right? Is that I'm not the kind of person who, and we've talked about this in past seasons, the pure exploration, just the complete untethered exploration of some Zelda games is not necessarily the thing that I'm looking for the most. It's not the thing that I enjoy the most. And it's funny because Breath of the Wild did this exact same thing, right? Where I am not really a fan of survival mechanics in any major way, but Breath of the Wild managed to implement them in a way that made me enjoy them. And even though I knew that's what they were, like I was playing that game and I was like, oh, cool. It's like a light survival sim. That was something that I was still enjoying a ton, despite the fact that I just am not a frequent player of those kinds of games. And by that same token, Tears of the Kingdom is really making me enjoy crafting and the economy of like different materials and like vehicle pieces and whatnot. It's making me enjoy that in a way that I probably wouldn't in many other games, and I certainly wouldn't be seeking those games out.
Yeah. So there's this thing that the Zelda series is very good at. Nintendo is very good at, is what I should actually say. But in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they basically took concepts and found a way to like hone them and focus them into a kind of a slimmer and purer version of themselves that was enjoyable for more people. That previously existed in other games, but had not yet hit huge audiences, or hadn't hit. That's not true.
Nintendo
Crafting
audiences.
has hit enormous audiences, but had hit more audiences than it had hit before. Breath of the Wild, the version of this was the survival mechanics, the active exploration was easier, and more like natural and organic for a lot of people. Like people had made waypoint lists, like you gotta figure out how to get places, kind of exploration games before, obviously. But like the actual act of navigation was made fun for more people by making it approachable, and it was so polished that it felt natural to people in a way that it doesn't necessarily in many other games. And then Tears of the Kingdom is doing it with, well, It's doing it with crafting. It's doing it with whatever we want to call the fuse mechanic. Like, because you kind of craft weapons with fuse. You craft objects with auto build and ultra hand. And those feel like slightly separate systems to me. And they brought those things closer together. Like, a lot of games have crafting systems where you go up to a tool bench or an NPC and like you go into a menu and you're like, I'm going to spend 7 of this resource, 8 of this resource, and I'm going to build a weapon. And then it like a tool of progress bar fills and you get a weapon.
Yeah. Like a Skyrim with blacksmithing.
Yeah. Where you're basically removing a selection of items in exchange for what is a new item.
Yeah. And then like look at Minecraft. Have either of you played Minecraft?
Not much.
I've seen people play Minecraft more than I have played.
So
it. Yeah.
Minecraft is a major touch point because it's one of the most popular games ever made. But like, you open up your inventory and you have a little crafting screen and you put your items in there and it creates items with a menu. And then you go out into the world and you place objects in the world. And by placing objects in different combinations, you can build things. And especially once you get into like redstone, which is like the logic system in that game. But what Tears of the Kingdom has done is it's brought those two systems closer together mechanically. They're almost the same thing, right? Like, I half think you could probably drop, I haven't really tried this, but you could probably throw 2 weapons on the ground and fuse them with Ultra Hand practically.
You can.
Like, that might literally fuse them like Fuse does.
I don't think it gives
like
you the attack benefits, but you can attach them together.
I have
Yeah.
definitely attached 2 spears together, and those 2 spears created one absurdly long spear.
Yeah, so like these 2 things that are normally very separate systems in other games are brought closer together so that like you can kind of, your understanding of one can inform your understanding of the other. And like it feels more seamless to swap between them. And of course, they're all like things you can do fast and easy within the game without having to go into menus or go to an NPC. It's just an ability you do right there in the world. So these kind of touches make it much more approachable for everyone.
So let me ask you, Max, of all the new abilities that we get, we're kind of bouncing between 2 big ones right now. We're going between Fuse and Ultra Hand at the moment. But let's open up the discussion and bring Ascend and Recall into the mix as well. Which of those 4 new core abilities do you find to be the most technically impressive?
The most technically impressive is the building. I keep forgetting the name of it. Ultra Hand. Using Ultra Hand to build things is the most technically impressive to me. And probably the second most technically impressive would be I'm trying to decide between Ascend and Time Rewind. Because those are both impressive as well. Ascend is like, game engines are bad at understanding the space inside of solid objects. Like, game engines don't really have a concept of solid or not. All they do is they simulate kind of the boundaries, the edges of objects. So there isn't really it's hard for a game engine to do this thing where it's like, okay, is there solid space from this ceiling up to this, other spot way higher? Because they don't understand solid space or not. So they did it. They made that work, made it understand solid objects versus non-solid objects in Breath. Sorry, I'm going to do that so much in Tears of the Kingdom. And that's probably, they probably had to figure some stuff out there that most game companies don't have to figure out for their games. And then the other one, the physics one, or sorry, not the physics ones, the Time Rewind one. That's impressive, not because it's hard to track the history of an object like that in most game engines, but because of just the sheer amount of objects they're able to track. Like they've done some crazy optimization to be able to have that many dynamic objects with physics active and the history of their physics being tracked. Like that's just impressive from a purely optimization kind of efficiency perspective. It's very impressive.
Well, and I mean, we're talking about optimization that took place over the course of 6 years, right? I mean, this is definitely the kind of thing where I feel like companies that aren't Nintendo would have had a very difficult time leveraging that amount of time into this project, right?
Yeah.
But since it's Nintendo and it's the Zelda team, I mean, it's kind of just, I feel like at this point, there's just so much trust there to where they can ask for that, and it's no big deal. And consumer trust as well.
Yeah. The Nintendo is, I mean, in a very fundamental way, Nintendo is able to tackle stuff like this. One, because of their business model. They're a first party studio. They don't even necessarily have to make their money back for each game they make, because what their goal with a game like Zelda is to sell consoles, not to sell games. Like it's okay if they lose money on a Zelda game, because they just need to sell Switches with it, because that's where their real money comes from. I don't think they do lose money.
I'm guessing they probably didn't lose money on this one.
No, but like it's just so much easier for them to justify things like delays, things like really long development times, things like we need an extra year for polish. Nobody can really do that most of the time, because an extra year is, I mean, on a game like this, you might your first thought might be like, oh, it's like 25% more cost. But no, it's probably more like 40% more cost, because the last year or two of development is when they have the most people working. The last year or two of development for a AAA game is when it costs more in terms of salaries, which is the biggest cost for game dev, than the earlier years, because there's more people. So when they delay a game by a year, that's a huge increase in the cost, and a commensurately huge increase in the amount of money that game needs to bring back in afterwards. So nobody can really do that too often unless they're just really confident in their IP and the quality of their game and stuff.
Well,
or they're a first party developer.
It's hard to think of a studio that has more justifiable confidence in an IP than The Legend of Zelda at this point, right?
Yeah. So like underpinning, like we talked about like individual abilities there and why they're impressive, but like what's really ultimately the most impressive part of all of this is the physics engineering and physics design in Tears of the Kingdom, which is what all of the others are built out of. Trying to think. So think back to like other games you two have played where maybe there's physics objects in them, like things that you can knock around, or
sure,
they can fall down a hill and they'll roll down the hill or whatever. Like, can you think of any game like that where physics, like interacting with the physics of things in the game world, was a major mechanic?
It was like Portal 2 comes immediately to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it. Like, honestly, as far as games that I've played.
So, I mean, the reason that, sorry, I'm like super monologuing here, but the reason that is because physics is really hard and chaotic. Like the physics systems in most games, it ends up being kind of just flair or set dressing, or like it's used for like a single object rolling along the terrain or something. And it's because like taming the physics in most game engines is not something that's been done. It's too unpredictable. It's hard to say like, here's your power as a player is to do this physics thing, because it's like, oh, that's just going to return bonkers bugs and like be totally broken in all sorts of ways. Allow players to skip things, like stuff will get stuck inside of other stuff. A tree will get stuck in a wall and vibrate and then shoot out of it at 1,000 miles an hour and kill you. Like that's that stuff is so common in games with physics systems that it's not even surprising to most gamers, really. We're like, yeah, that's what physics in games is.
Yeah.
It's crazy sometimes.
Well, and to that point, it does make me wonder, and Matt, you let me know what you think about this too, but I was thinking about this today. I think in Tears of the Kingdom specifically, I take a little bit of that for granted just because the basis of all of that, like Breath of the Wild, like even though your core suite of mechanics are different in Breath of the Wild, the way that physics work in that game, the way that the engine runs, the way that the world functions, it is still, I hesitate to say the exact same, but it feels fundamentally the same, right? Like at its very base, before you add the abilities, it feels the same. And so obviously there's like a lot of training and education that Breath of the Wild did up front. And I'm very curious what this game is like for a player who did not play Breath of the Wild. And I've got to believe that's a fairly niche crew of people. But at the same time, maybe it's not. I mean, the Switch is a widely adopted platform, and it's, I mean, Breath of the Wild came out at the beginning of the life cycle. I got to believe there's a lot of people who got Switches, for, Mario Kart or Party or, Metroid or whatever between now and then, and who haven't played Breath of the Wild, but got this game because of the buzz and because it was making a splash, right? And I'm very curious what this game must be like for somebody who did not spend time in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, I'm so curious of that too.
Yeah, so I think that it has a very similar feel, but to Max's point, it does feel so much more polished just with I think it mostly comes from the ability, the tracking ability of the objects with recall. Like, I don't know that Breath of the Wild could have done that. Like, I think the closest you get in something in Breath of the Wild, something like that is stasis, and that's just freezing an object in time and then shooting it unidirectionally, and with by causing it damage, which was still very impressive. So I don't want to dismiss how impressive Breath of the Wild was for its physics engine as well. But yeah, the polish here is just insane.
Well, that's why it's so difficult for me, because I've already started that, probably completely inconsequential discussion in my head of like, do I like this game more than Breath of the Wild? Right. That's an impossible question to answer. And no one's even asking me to answer it. Right. It's just like a fun thought exercise that's happening within my own brain. But it's so interesting because I think people have said this, and I kind of agree. There's such an incredible level of execution and such a depth of potential actions that stem out of all of these things that we're talking about right now, to where it does in some ways make Breath of the Wild feel rudimentary, which is just I still can't believe that I'm saying that, or that's a thought that I'm having. It blows my mind that that's where I'm at with it.
Well, so I think that it's true, and the fact that I think what it comes down to is Breath of the Wild took some abilities, like remote bombs was cool, but not like overly amazing, right? Like it's bombs. And then Cryonis was kind of the same. It was fine. Stasis and Magnesis were both like kind of the cooler, like, oh, this is unique and interesting. And Tears of the Kingdom has now taken all of their abilities are like potentially games you could build, or abilities you could build an entire game around. They are also potentially completely game breaking in so many dozens of different ways. And the fact that there is like a duplication glitch that Nintendo has already fixed, and that is basically it. And like the lack of glitches, the lack of game breaking bugs, the lack of bugs in general is completely astounding.
I have not heard of crashes in this game.
I haven't either, which is insane with some of the Rube Goldberg devices that I've seen people build. Like, I saw somebody who created like a portable death trap that he trapped an entire company of bokoblins and a boss bokoblin in, activated it, and it shot like 50 lasers and flames and lightning all at the same time. And the game was like, yep, this is good. I can do this. And I was sitting there like, what in the actual shit is going on? Like, it was
the dog in the room on fire meme saying this is fine, except the room wasn't on fire. The dog really meant it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really fine. Yes.
Yeah, like there's this one. I just did a shrine recently. I don't know if you is it okay if I talk about the mechanics of a shrine?
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Okay. So like, it's got a bridge that's just made up of all these panels that are like attached together with like some, I don't know, chains or something. And you can need to cross some lava by connecting the bridge to some wheels and having it roll across. And this bridge is made up of like 12 segments. Each one of them is individually simulated physics object. And the wheels pull the first one, and then it pulls the next one in the chain, and then it pulls the next one and the next one. So it's like 12 objects, each inheriting secondary kind of physics motion from the one earlier in the chain. And it just works. That's, as a game developer, when I saw that, I was like, holy crap, that's miraculous that worked. I don't think any other games engine would handle that. And that might not seem as obviously a big deal to someone watching if they aren't used to trying to make games work. But like, a bunch of different systems interacting, a bunch of different objects interacting, chains of cause and effect, all working in real time. In any other game, it would have they would have gotten inside of each other and they would have exploded in 12 different directions. Mm-hmm. So it's technologically amazing. And then the other half of all this is all the technology in the world doesn't do you any good if there isn't really good game design happening around making the physics system function well as like a thing that you can actually enjoy and play with, which they are totally doing in Tears of the Kingdom, if you want me to keep talking about that.
Well, so what I'm honestly more curious about is something that you mentioned a few minutes ago, which is, another element to this whole discussion is the fact that not only does all of this work, not only does it work correctly every time, but it's also all happening on what is very old hardware at this point. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion happening around, and especially in the lead up to this game, there was a lot of discussion around like, okay, we love that we're getting this. Is the Switch powerful enough to handle this? Like, because there were some games that we were getting on the Switch in the past few years that were really taxing it seemed, in terms of what it was able to display moment to moment. I mean, in the Discord the other day, I was mentioning Age of Calamity as a specific instance, right? Where that game really it really seemed like the Switch was kind of groaning under what that game was asking it to do. Obviously this game runs as smoothly or more smoothly, in my experience, than Breath of the Wild does, while doing more.
Definitely.
And so I'm just kind of wondering, to what extent does the power of the Switch even necessarily matter? Because like, I'm not talking graphics, it's a given that this is not a 4K ray tracing, it exists completely outside of the graphics arms race that the rest of the game industry kind of seems to be in the middle of at all times.
Yeah. So the way people talk about console power always annoys me. Not saying I'm annoyed at you right now, but like people will say
Lyndon,
stuff
I'm
like,
always annoyed at you. Why can't we be friends?
People will say stuff like, "Oh, the Switch is aged hardware," and it's like, no, it's just as powerful today as it was the day it came out 6 years ago, 7, whatever it was. I think it was brand new when Breath of the Wild came out.
Yeah, it was a launch. Breath of the Wild was a launch day.
6 years and a couple months ago. Like, it's just as powerful. So any game that was amazing that we made then, you could make a game just as amazing now. Most of history's best games are made on consoles weaker than the Switch. You don't need to be winning the arms race for tech in your consoles to make amazing games. But what does happen is when it coexists with much more powerful consoles, game companies will build stuff for the more powerful consoles, and they'll get used to that. They'll get used to like the corners they're allowed to cut or the areas where they're allowed to be inefficient. And then they'll try to go apply what they've learned to their Switch development, and they can't cut those corners and they can't be inefficient in those same ways. Or they'll try to port stuff directly. And then people on the Switch will try to like keep up with what's going on the stronger consoles. They'll be like, oh, we need to play the same game that they're playing, and it needs to work on the Switch. And that's when you run into like slow down. And so it is a somewhat artificial problem, but it is still a real problem that the Switch is aged. All that said, I do think Tears of the Kingdom is doing things that probably benefit, that would have been a lot easier on a more powerful console.
Yeah.
Like we've talked about, maintaining consistent frame rate, tracking physics history.
Yeah.
Nintendo just happens to do a good job of, understanding the constraints they're working under and then working within those constraints.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because of course people are going to mod this game, right? It will be running in emulators, and people will be kind of tinkering with it. But if the way that people were interacting in that way with Breath of the Wild is any indication, to my very limited exposure of the emulation community, I don't spend a whole lot of time following people who are working in that space. Not because I disagree with it, but just because I don't emulate games myself, because I'm usually happy to play them on just like the console that I own, right?
You don't have time to play all the games you're not emulating.
Yeah, I was going to say my PS5 that I've turned on twice is evidence to that. But I mean, it seems like Breath of the Wild emulation, outside of some kind of goofy stuff like, oh, Thomas the Tank Engine's in this game now, whatever. It seems like it mostly was just existing as like people saying, hey, here's what Breath of the Wild looks like in 4K with ray tracing, right? And I think that's actually such an awesome affirmation of the technical achievement that Breath of the Wild was, and that Tears of the Kingdom is as well, when the suite of things that are just naturally in the game is so compelling that people aren't spending tons of time trying to make a new suite of systems within a game.
Yeah. I haven't felt the desire to go make mods for a game in a long time, but I have occasionally toyed with the thought for Breath of the Wild, because it's just a game world I would love to make content in.
So I've got one or two specific topics that I want to get into just a little bit more. And the first one is I want to go back to our discussion about the Great Sky Island and the ways in which it compares to the Great Plateau. Because I know from what you just said a minute ago, Max, and also from the thread that you've been kind of updating on Twitter ever since launch day, I know that you kind of come down on the Great Sky Island in a bit of a different way than Matt and I did. At least, is it fair to say that you feel like the Great Plateau is maybe the more solid introductory area to a game?
Yes.
Okay.
I do think that, but it's a kind of a complicated question. The core difference is that Breath of the Wild overall is a more focused game than Tears of the Kingdom. Breath of the Wild has less going on in it. It has fewer systems. It has fewer things it needs to teach, fewer edge cases it needs to show you. They kind of just don't have to teach you as much. So it was easier for them to make a tutorial area. All they really needed to do was give you a blank slate canvas that had a little bit of everything, a little microcosm of the game, and then say, we are setting you loose in this little playground, the safe playground where nothing scales too strong. There's not too much happening yet. And go knock yourself out, kid. And then you hear stories about someone, my kid played for 40 hours and I came to check on them and they spent 40 hours on just the Great Plateau, because it was that much of a full experience. And so I don't think the Great Sky Island is as successful in that way as a microcosm of the game. It's more directed. It's less free. It has to teach you a lot more. And the things it's teaching you are more complicated. So it's kind of more tightly controlled. It's more about like traversing along corridors than it is about going wherever you want.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of freedom compared to a lot of other games, but compared to the Great Plateau, there's a lot less freedom.
So your answer to this question kind of brought me to the heart of what I was kind of trying to get at and where I wanted to take this discussion. And the heart of this whole thing is, to what extent is Tears of the Kingdom more or less focused of a game than Breath of the Wild? And I know you've just said you feel like Tears of the Kingdom is a less focused game. Matt, I want to pass it to you real quick.
Sure.
Do you feel like Tears is more or less focused of an experience than Breath of the Wild?
I think it's far more broad, which intrinsically makes it less focused. Like Breath of the Wild was most definitely an open world exploration with a little bit of survival thrown in there. Tears takes all of that, adds 2 more areas which require very different types of exploration. So you're having to invest in different mechanics like battery power for your various devices that help you get around the Sky Islands. You're having to invest in different ways to explore completely pitch black areas of the depths. It also adds in, of course, that we've talked about all of the crafting and everything that goes into that. So you have basically 2.5 times the amount of game, more density, and a bunch of other mechanics thrown on top of it that are incredibly intrinsic to the game itself, and it just blows it up to huge proportions. And what is incredible to me about that is a lot of times games that get this way just feel bloated in a bad way. And Tears of the Kingdom does not feel bloated. It just feels big. And I think the magic that Nintendo has accomplished is by making each of these things unique and fun and rewarding all at the same time.
Yeah. So it's complicated for me because I think that the gameplay loop is in some ways a little bit more focused than Breath of the Wild. Like, I think that the core suite of abilities and the way that you're using them work together in more seamless ways than Breath of the Wild did. You know, I like stasis and magnesis and remote bombs and all those things well enough in and of themselves. They each had fun puzzles that revolved around them in Breath of the Wild. But the thing is that they never really felt like they were playing together in any major way, which is the opposite of how everything's working in Tears of the Kingdom, right? Whereas it feels like there's one specific use case for when you might want to use Cryonis, or stasis. It feels like Ascend and Recall and Ultra Hand and Fuse, like they're all just kind of this very fluent language of overall traversal and interaction with Tears of the Kingdom. And so I think that is a type of focus in and of itself. I will say that one feeling that I've kind of had playing this game a lot over the last few weeks has been that in some ways the world feels smaller to me than Breath of the Wild did. And obviously it's not. It's bigger. It's bigger by orders of magnitude. However, I've spent most of my time on the surface up until this point, and then on the Sky Islands. I've explored the depths a little bit too. But I mean, so in Breath of the Wild, what I was able to do on each playthrough is determine a path based on geography, right? And I would kind of set myself on that path and just conquer areas of the map at different times. And the journey and the travel to those different areas felt like it just felt like it took longer, because it did, right? You had some fast travel just based on shrines as you got to them, right? But other than that, you've got the paraglider, and basically you're just relying on like finding new Sheikah towers and jumping off of those and getting a little bit of distance via flight, But because this game has got the sky view towers, which launch you so far up into the sky, and then combined with the paraglider or jumping off of an island, like it feels like the world itself is it's just a bit more accessible from the get-go than Breath of the Wild was. And in Breath of the Wild, obviously, you could go anywhere in the world once you got the paraglider. But in this game, it sort of feels like anywhere is a little bit closer to where you are now, just in terms of gameplay time, than Breath of the Wild was.
The shortest path to any given point is much shorter.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting. Like I think a lot of what's happening for me right now is I'm trying to recontextualize the way that I interact with this world, just because I spent so much time in Breath of the Wild, and the way that I'm spending that time in Tears of the Kingdom is so different. And I think that somewhere in there is kind of the feeling that I have, which is that, yes, Tears of the Kingdom is less focused. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing necessarily, but I do think, Breath of the Wild was much more about, to me, Breath of the Wild was much more about this world feeling massive. And even though it was just the overworld, right? And we've gotten 2 more planes of play on top of that now, that overworld felt somehow bigger than it does to me in Tears of the Kingdom. And I'm not prepared to call that a negative in any way, but it does feel very different.
I think a lot of people are going to have this automatic knee-jerk desire to compare the two. And at first glance, a lot of people are going to think and feel and say that Tears of the Kingdom is like the same game, but better. It's the same game, but there's more of it. The same game with a better economy. And I think that is a disservice to Breath of the Wild, but also to just the nuances that can go into them. They're very different games. They are achieving different things, and those things are still equally valid. And I personally probably am going to end all of this thinking that Breath of the Wild is my preferred game of the two, even though by a lot of objective measures, Tears of the Kingdom is going to be a better game. A lot of it boils down to like, what is the goals they're pursuing and what are the goals they're achieving?
I definitely think there's something there for sure. And it's obviously the kind of thing where we're going to have to actually finish the game and then kind of sit in it for a while,
6 years. Ask me in 6 years.
Well, hopefully we'll get to it on the podcast before then and give it a real proper season.
You would hope. You really would.
I've said this on the Discord a few times, but I am kind of dreading the plot recaps for this game, and also trying to lay it out.
Yeah,
is going to be wow.
I mean, but to that point, without getting into specifics, because we're not going to be covering what happens in the memories, or we're not going to be talking too specifically about the plot of this game. But just a question for you, Max. I mean, generally speaking, do you feel that this game has a superior story to Breath of the Wild from what you've seen so far?
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. I think there's this interesting thing that's happening where in Breath of the Wild, this actually gets back to what we were just talking about. In Breath of the Wild, I was like, I cared a lot about experiencing the backstory through the memories, but I didn't care about it in a way that made me hungry to like seek out memories as a high priority most of the time. Like that, what I was exploring, that was what I was playing for, was to explore. And sometimes in the process of exploring, I'd find a memory and I would love it when I found one. But in this game, I'm finding myself skipping over vast stretches of land in order to get to a new major objective, because I want to see more story and I want to see more of the big spectacle moments. So like, it is a better story, and it maybe would have been a worse fit in Breath of the Wild because the kind of game Breath of the Wild was trying to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm filling in the map much more quickly in Tears than I was in Breath of the Wild, and a lot of that is just because like we were just talking about, like I'm trying to track down those memories and to really immerse myself in the story of this game. And so, I was playing for a few hours the other night, and in that time, I made it from Hebra to Eldin to Lineru and to Korok Forest, and unlocked the Skyview Towers for all of those areas, which basically means that even though I've played only about 30 hours of this game, maybe I've unlocked functionally 2/3 of the map, pretty much. Which is definitely, I mean, took me much longer than that in Breath of the Wild. And I think it really is down to what you're talking about, Max, which is that there's more opportunity and more incentive to do that in this game. And for a minute there, I really felt like I was rushing. Like I kind of felt bad about it. And it was just like, man, I really feel like I'm just trucking through this too fast. And then I had to kind of pull back from that thought a little bit and realize like, okay, this is okay, because like I need to be objective about this and realize that even though I filled in so much of this, like just the surface map, that's still just such a, like in Breath of the Wild, so much of the game was getting to that next Sheikah Tower. Right. Like that was such an integral part of traversal in that game. And in Tears of the Kingdom, it's much less of a focus. And in some ways, I think it is better to maybe just have as many of these towers unlocked from the go as you can, partially just because like we've been saying, it is easier to get to them. And then once you do have them unlocked, then, you know, it's a lot more fluid getting to different areas of the sky and then finding new chasms to get down to the depths, right?
I mean, I agree. I think that there's just a lot more to explore. So I didn't feel nearly as bad either about taking the 4 hours to go chase the memories and get that done, because now I have the entire rest of the game to do. And I also have an easier path to, hey, I haven't like filled in very much of Necluda, and I don't have like any shrines over there, and I haven't gotten the Great Fairy, and maybe I'm going to leave Hebra, where I did my first dungeon in Hebra. And I'm just going to go over to Necluda and kind of explore that area and try to fill in that a little bit. Now I have an easier way of doing that.
Sure.
So I think that for me, honestly, part of the incentive of doing the memories was getting to a point where I could more easily traverse around the map instead of having to take my horse from one end to the other. And that's been really nice as I've been going through the last. You now probably
have the towers and teleport points everywhere, right?
I do.
Like you can quickly get anywhere.
Yep, I can get to any of the regions, in the click of a button, and then with the various flying instruments that you can have between gliders, the gliding suit, and any Zonai devices you may have, it's pretty easy to cover large areas of ground quickly.
So, I mean, now that you've gotten the memories, because I know that you, much like I'm doing now, I've sidelined everything.
Yes.
In favor of just going and getting these memories.
Yes.
And you've already done that. So what's your next trajectory now that you've gotten that finished?
So I'm going to get at least 3 of the Great Fairies open because I want to upgrade gear. One thing we've talked a lot about is just how incredibly hard enemies hit in this game. And even with, I probably have 10 or 12 hearts now. Even with 10 or 12 hearts, I just want more ability to protect myself. And also, one super cool thing about this game is you can get the amiibo armor sets from Breath of the Wild are just in the world to find. So, I've got the Fierce Deity armor and trying to track down some other cool armor sets. Then I want to be able to actually create like a character build around those and get stuff upgraded. I want to go visit all the points of interest from Breath of the Wild. I want to go to Hateno, and I've been to Terrytown, but I want to do more stuff in Terrytown. I want to do whatever house quest there is, which I've already done some part of it, and I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't done the house quest, but I want to do house stuff. Like I just kind of want to start filling in those gaps of things that seem small, but like have a lot of import in the game to me.
Yeah.
And I think my next big objective is going to be doing a lot more exploration of the depths and trying to get more light roots active down there to see what's down there, because I've run into some pretty interesting stuff, but I don't feel like I know nearly enough about what is really down in the depths right now.
Yeah. Once I'm done with the memories, I'm definitely going to be spending much more time in the depths. I have put almost no effort whatsoever into upgrading my Zonai battery. And because
it's important.
It really is. And because of that, I've actually spent far less time playing around with Zonai devices than a lot of people have, at least as far as what I've seen on Twitter and places like that. I mean, because the issue is that as long as you have just like one energy cell, the time that it takes to build a new device is what I have found it to not be incredibly worth it in terms of the amount of traversal. Yeah, like the amount of use you get out of it, because that one energy cell depletes so quickly. And so, yeah, I have spent far less time building devices and trying to make vehicles and stuff to get from point A to point B. And really have just been relying more on, Skyview towers and my glider, right?
Yeah.
What about you, Max? What's your next big trajectory that you're going to go and hit? I mean, what are you kind of working towards right now?
So I just completed my 3rd dungeon. And at this point, I am going to be focusing on getting all the memories. I left it till much later than you two are, because I'm 60 hours in, but but I'm now at the point where I'm like, actually what's happened partly is that my wife has gotten all the memories in her playthrough, and she's like buzzing with excitement to talk to me about them, and I have told her not to talk to me about them until I get them. So I want to talk to her about this thing she's excited about, so I'm gonna go get all the memories.
I've been bugging Lyndon nonstop about it since I completed it. So
yeah, and it was so hard, right? Because I was trying to balance I was trying to adopt a Breath of the Wild style to the way that I was kind of trekking through this entire world, right?
Yes. I did the same thing. Like, I played Breath of the Wild where I would go to a zone and I would thoroughly explore that whole zone before I would move to the next zone. Yep. I left a trail of completed zones in my wake. And in this game, I'm like flitting from major objective to major objective, regardless of what zone they're in. And a major factor in all this is the fact that it's a world I've already explored, right?
Right.
Like, we haven't talked about that yet, but like, of course I'm less interested in exploring every nook and cranny because I've literally already done that. And it's mostly the same landscape.
I will say exact same thoughts and feelings, Max. One area that I feel like I'm doing a disservice to myself in kind of flitting between major areas so much is that I'm missing one of the coolest additions to this game, which is the systems of caves that are on the surface.
Oh yeah.
Which, I mean, those are awesome. And I love them so much. And I have not to spoil anything, but I have found that there is a mechanic in this game by which it makes it easier to seek out caves, if that's what you want to do. And
I have found this mechanic as well.
Yes, I think it's really cool. But I think once I'm done with some of the stuff I'm doing now, then I am just going to like luxuriate in the exploration of this world a little bit more. And I'm probably going to be parallel pathing shrine grinding and cave discovery at the same time. And that prospect sounds honestly very exciting to me. But yeah, definitely like exact same thing, Max. I mean, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier, where it makes me wonder how much different this gameplay experience must be for somebody who didn't play Breath of the Wild, because, again, like I'm totally comfortable just kind of going straight from Eldin to the Gerudo Desert, right? Because it's like, been there, done that. And that's not to discount all the new things that are there. I know that there are plenty of them, but even canonically, I think it actually makes a certain amount of sense, right? Because to me, this Link has done those things, right? He's he's been all around Hyrule. And, Breath of the Wild was a game about ruins, right? About desertion, about like the pieces after an apocalypse. And
yes, Breath of the Wild felt so much more desolate and dangerous to be wandering around the overworld than this game does. This game is full of life and new construction, and
I think desolate is more accurate than dangerous, in my opinion. Like, this game is far more dangerous. Like, there are just enemy encampments literally everywhere. And
I mean, nothing is as dangerous as the Guardians were, though.
The Gleeoks would like to have a word.
Yeah. A Gleeok and a Gloomhand, maybe. movie. But I mean, that's the Guardians were scary for sure until you got good at shield parrying. But Desolate for sure. And that's one of the things I've liked so far about how this overworld is the same but different. It's not even so much about the upheaval. It's about how much more lived in it feels, how much more vibrant it feels, how much more populous, and seeing the rebuilding that has taken place.
Yeah.
Like, I love that aspect of this game,
especially since you look at it and you're like, I did that,
right?
Yeah,
it's
that's
because
true.
of me that this whole world is revitalized. Assuming you played Breath of the Wild first.
Well, but I love that, like, NPCs and, like, that's borne out in the interactions that you're having with characters in the game too, which is very gratifying, right, for someone who's played a lot of Breath of the Wild. And I really love little touches that are thrown into that effect. So here's the point where I kind of want to move. We've mentioned dungeons once or twice, and we have not talked about dungeons in any of our episodes so far. Because I hadn't done any. Matt, I think you had done the first one as of
last week. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
The first one.
But we talked before we started recording this episode, and Matt and I have only done one dungeon apiece, and Max has also done that one dungeon. So, like we said earlier, a big component of conversation around Breath of the Wild was the extent to which it just did not have dungeons in the way that a lot of people were hoping that it would. And, the divine beasts kind of being interesting in and of themselves, but not necessarily filling that gap. Right. So here's where I want to go ahead and have some conversations about the way that this game handles dungeons. And obviously that's pretty spoilery. We're going to talk about the setting and context around this particular dungeon, the theming of it, things like that. And so for that reason, I'm going to go back in here with an editing mic and drop in a timestamp for if you want to shoot past the dungeon discussion, then you're free to do that. If you have not played, and just to be more specific, we're going to be talking about the dungeon that takes place in the Rito area of the map. So if you haven't done that yet, then, feel free to come back to this another time, please.
Hey, listen!
Hey, y'all. For those of you looking to skip ahead right past the dungeon section, the timestamp that you're going to be looking for is 1 hour and 45 minutes, and that'll get you clear of this entire spoilery little chapter. So let's go ahead and talk about the dungeon in the Rito area. And Matt, I said that I was going to bounce it to you first. So really, just gut reactions. We have completed a dungeon. And I know you and I have had some offline discussions about, like, having enjoyed it, but even finding some difficulty in, like, categorizing, like, where does the dungeon start, for instance? Like, what are we even calling the dungeon? So just some general thoughts here.
Sure. So, like, I know we talked a lot in the Breath of the Wild season about really missing this experience, this very Zelda specific experience. And there are a lot of games that have tried to duplicate the Zelda dungeon, some successfully, most not. And I think that wow, I'm just doing the same thing Max
We need
was
to
doing
make a
earlier.
jar for that.
Yeah, we do. The thing that Tears of the Kingdom has done is not exactly the same formula as, like, a super traditional Zelda dungeon. It's not an Ocarina of Time dungeon. It's not a Skyward Sword dungeon. I think it floats closer towards Skyward Sword-esque because of that thing that you mentioned right at the very end of your intro, which is, where does the dungeon start versus where does it end? Or, where does it start versus where does it not start? And you would think, like, in Ocarina of Time, the dungeon starts when you enter the area and it says Fire Temple, Forest Temple. Like, that's the start of the dungeon.
Yeah. Well, specifically when you walk through a door,
right,
and you clearly are loading into a new area.
Right. And Tears of the Kingdom, at least the Rito dungeon, which is the only one I've done so far, did this really cool thing. And it was kind of Skyward Sword-esque, where you go into a new area that is gated by an NPC in this case. Like, you can't get into this area without talking to the NPC and having your partner character with you. And once you enter that area, You don't load into anything. It doesn't look any different. It's literally a part of the overworld, but it sets you on a trajectory into the dungeon proper, I guess I'll call it. And the entire lead up to the dungeon is really part of the dungeon. And that's something Skyward Sword kind of did also, which was the lead up to specifically the Lanayru Sandship is another reason why I brought this up when we were introing Max and how we like his episodes, is the Lanayru Sandship was also very much like this. Everything to get you onto the Sandship was really part of the dungeon experience. And everything to get you onto the Windship Arc was really part of the dungeon
That would
experience.
be the Stormwind arc. I was trying to remember the name of it before this. I was like, is it like the Windstorm ship? Is it the Wind ship?
I knew Arc was in there.
Yeah, I had to Google it. It's
Okay,
the Stormwind arc, which is a really cool name.
It's really cool. So getting onto the Stormwind Arc was part of the dungeon. And it was so fun. And like the traversal mechanics, the utilizing of the Sage mechanic to help you through that. The combat that was part of it, which is another thing that was severely lacking in the Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild, was there was basically no combat. There was combat leading up to the Stormwind Arc. There's combat in the Stormwind Arc. Not a lot. There's no mini bosses, but there's enemies to fight, and fighting those enemies is part of solving the various puzzles. There's environmental hazards to avoid when you're trying to solve the puzzles as well. But it all kind of eventually wrapped together, and it took me a bit to like sit with it after I had completed it. After I had done the really phenomenal boss fight, I really enjoyed the Stormwind Arc boss fight. I liked it a lot.
Colgera.
Yeah, it was really cool. It had those things that we look for in a dungeon. It had the sense of place, which was huge. It was amazing. And that's one thing we talked about being the best thing about the Rito Divine Beast also was it had the best sense of place. And I think that's true. At least I thought it was an amazing sense of place here as well. It had engaging mechanics. It had puzzles to solve that made me think and rethink how to approach a situation. It had interesting mechanics surrounding those things. Like I liked the dungeon a lot. And when I first beat it, and I thought to myself, that was Divine Beast short. And then I sat there for a while and thought about it. I saved and turned the game off and went to bed and was laying in bed just thinking about it. And I was like, that's when I kind of came to the conclusion that all of the lead up was really also part of the dungeon. And when you think about the lead up and the dungeon together as the full experience, I think they did a very good job in a very Tears of the Kingdom style.
Yeah. It's so interesting because to me, this dungeon really does begin once you pair up with your NPC. And it's a little deceptive because once you get up to the Stormwind Arc, it does, like, you still do get that loading screen, right? Where it's like
you're diving down through the cloud barrier.
It's like a new location discovered, Stormwind Arc, right? And the game would have you believe that that's the official beginning of the dungeon. But I think your comparison to the Lanayru Sand Sea is very apt. And I think that that's one of the reasons that I enjoyed this so much as well. Honestly, the way in which you had to utilize Ascend, like one of your core abilities to even get up there, was really impressive and fun. What I love about this too is that this is like the complex of islands that take you up to the ship itself. Like, this is a seamless part of the world. You can see those from anywhere else on the map, right?
But you can't access them without your NPC character. Like the gusts will take you out. So I think it is a really cool gating mechanic where it's not a hard, it's not like a geographic gate. It's not a loading gate. It's not a, you can't pass this point at this point in the game, like turn back now. Like, it's none of those. It's just the seamless integration, like you said, is just mind-blowing and phenomenal.
I feel very similarly, and I think you're right. In structure, the dungeon is still very similar to what we have with Divine Beasts, right? Where once you're on the ship, it's a game of unlocking 4 things to get to the boss, 5 things, whatever, right? And then that unlocks the boss, and then you can beat the dungeon. I think one of the things that actually makes the most difference. And I'm wondering if this is what people were just wanting that whole time people were talking about how they wanted more traditional feeling Zelda dungeons. I wonder if a lot of that was just coming down to the atmosphere of things and the fact that the divine beasts all felt very samey with one another because it was all
very samey to the shrines.
Sure. Because it was all Shikatech that was aesthetically similar. The bosses were aesthetically similar, right?
Yeah, that's a huge part. Imagine if there was a single divine beast in like Skyward Sword. It would be amazing. It would be so cool, right?
Yeah.
It would stand out so much. It is so much of it is the fact that contextually it doesn't stand out. It doesn't feel like its own thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, Max, talking specifically about Stormwind Arc, what do you think about this game's approach to dungeons?
Yeah, so Stormwind Arc was also my first dungeon. So even though I've done a couple more after this, I can still kind of talk about this from the perspective of like, this is how I felt when it was the first dungeon I did.
And it's worth mentioning that the game does sort of funnel you a little bit towards doing that one first, just via dialogue and some other things.
Yeah, everything pushes you towards Rito Village originally, which I thought was interesting. I liked it, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, a few of the like major quests, like go talk to Impa, like is towards Rito Village. But where was I? Anyways, yes, I'm generally feel like these are a huge improvement over Breath of the Wild, but still ultimately less satisfying than the strong dungeon games like Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time. It's probably a little too early for you two to make that big of a judgment.
So where do you, I guess, where are you coming down though on this whole thing we're talking about in terms of where the dungeon actually begins? And like, because based on how you feel about that, the dungeon is either pretty short or pretty long.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I think of the dungeon beginning as when you get the Discovery Wind Temple. Like in my mind, that's when the dungeon begins. However, I do consider the lead up to a dungeon part of the overall dungeon experience. Just like in the Wind Waker or on Dragon Roost Island, you have to traverse some caves and go through some stuff before you get to the formal dungeon entrance, right? There's like a quest to get to the dungeon. I do think the approach to this dungeon is spectacular. Like, it's like this cool, like they could never have done it without introducing something like the sky, right? Where you kind of are funneled along a specific route. Like that's the main reason, like that's one of the main reasons the sky is a big win for this game, is it allows them to create these kind of more linear experiences, which is, not something a lot of us necessarily thought of as missing from Breath of the Wild, but it kind of held their hands or like tied their hands in a bunch of ways that now they're able to do that. But it's like visually spectacular, and it's got this really cool, like ominous, like tension ratcheting up feeling as you get closer and closer to this Stormhead. And like you think you're getting closer and closer, and you're like, oh crap, it is huge.
So much bigger
further
than
away than I
it would.
thought.
Yeah.
It's really impressive.
And a lot of that is a big win on the part of the soundtrack too. I mean, we haven't really talked about the music very much in this game at all, and I think it's spectacular. But the soundtrack is doing this awesome thing where it's building in tension as you get closer to the Thunderhead as well, right? And so that combined with the fact that you are just like this monolithic weather system, like you're getting physically closer to it, but the music is kind of ratcheting up that tension as well. It's a bunch of things playing together that really create that feeling.
Yeah.
And
like to me, that feeling doesn't feel like a dungeon. Like that traversal to get there doesn't feel like a dungeon, but it is its own awesome experience.
I think like what I kind of compare it to also is each of the divine beasts had the same lead up. It was get with your NPC character, hit the 4 things on each divine beast to tame it or calm it down enough to board it. And this was like that, but way better and way longer, and not just glide around with Tiba and shoot some cannons, or swim with Sidon and shock each of the legs. It was very unique to the mechanics that you were going to use in the dungeon itself, and also it was more traversal, which I liked a lot.
Yeah,
I think it was a vast improvement over the Divine Beast portal.
I mean, I just think, to me, going back to this conversation of like, where do we consider the dungeon to actually begin? I get what you're saying, Max, and I agree with it in part. But what I keep coming back to is, in my mind, when I was thinking to myself, what would a successful dungeon even be like in a Breath of the Wild style game? What I keep coming back to is there has to be an element of seamlessness, right, in order for it to really feel successful, because so much of the success of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is in the seamlessness of the world. And again, that's one way in which the Divine Beasts were kind of underwhelming, right? Because once you got to the Divine Beast, it was very much like, even though they were existing in the world, they felt like distinct zones, and travel in and out of them organically was not really
it had a loading screen.
Yeah. And then once you cleared them, you were not able to go back inside them again. And I'm not sure how it is with any of the dungeons after the Stormwind arc, but
I have gone to the Stormwind arc after.
Yeah, so have I. And then once you're in the Stormwind, like if you load back in there, you can freely jump off of that and just coast back down to the main world. There's no loading screen between those things. Like, it's a seamless part.
Yeah.
I
wonder if you can fall out of it down to the mountain below.
You can.
During the dungeon.
I've done it.
Yeah.
Oh, not during the dungeon.
But I hadn't tested it.
During the dungeon, you cannot, because the Stormhead is still active. So if you fall too far down, you get the infinite fall to your death scream.
Gotcha.
Well, it's kind of it's the same way that the Great Sky Island is, right? If you try to jump off the Great Sky Island before you're supposed to, then you get that thing that happens and you lose a heart. But anytime after that, you're good to just jump straight off to anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. I was disappointed to find that once I got into the dungeon, it had the same kind of internal structure as a Divine Beast, where it's like, there's 4 points. They are unrelated to each other. Make your way, do like 4 individual puzzles in any order to get to them.
I agree. And that's why when I first finished the dungeon, I kind of went away being like, it was better, but still not great. And then I had to, once I kind of brought myself back into the whole experience tied together was better. I still don't think it reaches the dungeon itch that I'm looking for.
Like the Stone Tower temples of the world, for instance.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily need... I say that I don't need a Skyward Sword level dungeon or an Ocarina of Time or a Majora's Mask level dungeon. I say I don't need that. I kind of need that. Like I really do. And I don't think it's impossible. Like I really don't, because they segregated Stormwind Arc enough via loading screen. I don't see a reason that it couldn't have been a full back to front dungeon with a mini boss, with a main mechanic. Like, sure, you're not going to get an item, but you don't get an item in A Link Between Worlds, and those were fully fleshed out dungeons. So, like, yeah, I think,
well, they were certainly 2/3 of a fully fleshed out dungeon.
Sure, but
yeah,
I mean, there's really is no reason other than design philosophy of the game that these are not true dungeons.
The thing that, like, the stuff that they feel like they're missing to me is a traditional Zelda dungeon has it introduces some mechanics and then it builds them up. You have to master them as you play through. It starts combining them and ratcheting up the stakes and giving you harder versions of them, so that even though you've mastered the beginning of it, now you have to master it again. And then it gives you a new mechanic via item halfway through that makes you approach those puzzles differently, or gives you access to more of those puzzles. And these don't have that buildup. They don't have that buildup. They don't have the recontextualization that you get from a new item halfway through. and they're short and they're combat light. Not as light as the Divine Beasts were, but there still are.
It's just trash mobs.
Yeah. So that's ultimately why they still feel unsatisfying to me. Maybe if they had given you the ally halfway through the dungeon and then the ally joined you and gave you the ally's mechanic, that could have functioned like getting an item halfway through a dungeon.
Yeah, or even just unlocked an upgraded version of their ability or something. Like, I think you're totally right, Max. Like, there is built in here a way to have a dungeon like that. And
so, this is such a funny thing to me because assuming that the other dungeons follow a similar mechanic, which is that you have an NPC and you're relying on the thing that they do in order to beat the dungeon, which I'm assuming is the case. Basically, what that means is that what we have in this game is oops, all escort dungeons.
No, it's not. I knew you were going to say that. As soon as you started the thought, I knew you were going there. It's not, because your performance in the dungeon does not rely on keeping that entirely helpless NPC alive and with you at all times. They intrinsically follow you around. They follow you through the doors by themselves, which was a big thing in Wind Waker for me, obviously.
They don't even have doors.
Exactly. So, like, they're not escort missions. What I think of the NPCs as is a limited time unique ability. And that you have that unique ability, and it's just for some reason tied to this person that's following you around. I have feelings about the Sage abilities compared to the champion abilities. I think champion abilities were better executed, personally. I don't like having the Sages following me around.
You just miss Rivali's Gale.
I kind of miss Rivali's Gale. I more miss Urbosa's Fury. But like having to manually activate Sage abilities via going up to the Sage and pressing A twice is clunky, and I don't like it. Having them on demand via, different button mapping or activation was better in my opinion. But so no, I don't think that they're escort missions at all.
I don't either.
That's fair. It was a good joke. But anyway,
I will hold off on commenting on kind of the UX of how you use their abilities until you two have had time to go through more dungeons.
Gotcha.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But I will say one thing that was a huge win here for me was just like we're talking about the theming of things and the ways in which the Divine Beasts all felt too samey. The Blight Ganons also all felt too samey to me.
Yeah, totally.
And so fighting what is essentially, Colgera could have been a boss in any other dungeon in any other Zelda game, right?
For sure. Yeah. I think...
Yeah, it finally, Zelda bosses are back.
Yes.
Is how I felt when I was fighting that thing.
Absolutely. That thing jumps up out of the Stormwind arc, throws you up in the air, and you spend the entire time doing aerial combat, which, by the way, I don't know how they pulled this off, but aerial combat in a Zelda game feeling great and amazing. Like, holy cow. It was so fun. That was a really fun fight. I enjoyed that thoroughly.
With kick-ass Rito Village theme version of the boss battle theme.
I just loved that so much. One of my favorite things in Breath of the Wild was the fact that they kind of leveraged the Dragon Roost Island music for Rito Village, and they just take it a step further in the Colgera fight.
Yeah, and in the Rito Village leading up to it. Like, there's like 3 or 4 versions of the Dragon Roost Island theme you hear over this chunk of the game.
Yep.
And I love it every time. I was very slightly disappointed that I didn't get an awesome remix of the Mulgera fight theme.
Right.
That would have been fun, wouldn't it?
We can't have everything. Yeah.
I can't get all of my favorite songs at once.
No, I think what is causing this to feel like a really satisfying overall experience to me is in a lot of ways about much more than just the experience of the dungeon. The whole story and plot of what happens once you get to Rito Village, and then that takes you all the way up the islands and then into the dungeon. That all just feels so great together. And I understand that that's like, now we're having a much bigger conversation about a lot of different things, right? Like we're talking about how emotionally satisfying it is to see places that we visited in Breath of the Wild that are now in a different state, and we're trying to fix them, right? Which, by the way, Frozen Rito Village, I mean, that's straight out of Ocarina of Time stuff right there.
Yeah, except it actually melted afterwards.
It did.
Which was awesome.
But it's like, I don't know. I would say that right now, in terms of the main story pursuits, I'm having trouble just separating my feelings out into just how I feel about the dungeon, because as a whole, all taken together, it's all feeling so satisfying. And there is a little bit of bias just by virtue of the fact that I have spent so much time in this world already. Like, I feel emotionally attached to these places and these characters already. Seeing Tiba now as the village elder in Rito Village, and like seeing Rito Village, which was this beautiful place in Breath of the Wild, but is now frozen solid.
When you get there and it's nothing but the kids holding down the fort, and you're like, oh no, where are all your parents?
they seem like they did an okay job. I mean,
you shouldn't be having to fletch these arrows, fledgling.
Right?
Yeah, seriously.
But I think it's a case of the sum of all the parts together, being really spectacular. And that's really all that I ever wanted. I mean, I think that so often in Breath of the Wild, the conversation just got distilled down into the dungeon itself specifically, right? And I think that what I'm finding is that the thing that I was missing wasn't so much that in and of itself. It was just the way that all of these things come together into a 2 or 3 hour experience that feels emotionally fulfilling by the time that you've gotten it all done.
Yeah. Which that's an interesting observation, because that's another thing. Like, that's kind of the Ocarina of Time style dungeon experience. A dungeon is the center of a larger arc that involves usually like a new village, new characters, a new sage. You arrive there and there's problems and you fix them. And that's something that's missing from the 2D Zelda games. Like, when you played A Link Between Worlds, you didn't have that kind of arc for each dungeon. And that's part of what makes them feel like these abrupt experiences. You just suddenly dungeon. So it was really cool to have that whole arc.
Well, and I think it's so fun, because talking again about the comparisons to Ocarina of Time, in Ocarina of Time, you had this. It's basically a 2-part story, right? Where you discover all of these places as a child. And then as an adult, you come back and everything's kind of gone to shit. And you have to solve for that. So there was emotional investment in that just over the course of one, 30-hour game, if even that, right? 30 hours is probably generous for Ocarina of Time. But in Tears of the Kingdom, you have the exact same thing happening, and once again, with the caveat that this only really applies for Breath of the Wild players, which we are, you have that exact same thing happening over the course of 2 games, which is yet another feather in the cap of the argument for why I think the reuse of the Breath of the Wild world was actually a big net positive. For as much as people were worried about it going into this game, it's like, reusing assets and just, spending more time in the like whatever. Reusing assets. Can never hear that enough. I think it actually ends up being a huge boon to the success of this game and its story.
I agree. I think I ultimately, I'm not going to lie, I would have rather had a new land to explore. But in the absence of that, I do think they found a ton of really cool like strengths and benefits from doing kind of a 6-year time jump or whatever it is. I don't actually know how long the time jump is, but it feels like 5 or 6 years.
Sacred Realms headcanon is 6 years. It's real time.
Yeah. So they found a lot of benefits from this that could only have been done by doing the same world with the time jump. right? Like you run across places that you had emotional attachments to and they have changed. You can run across characters that you met and had emotional attachments to and they have changed or grown or taken on new roles in the world. Or you get that thing we were talking about earlier where like in Breath of the Wild, the world felt desolate and it was kind of dangerous because, you know, Guardian might spot you from half a mile away and you have to run for cover. And now it's bustling and filled with people. You know, you explored Hyrule and now the ruins of the, like exploring ruins is now something you do in the sky, and exploring the unknown is something you do underground. Like having that contrast is really cool.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to go ahead and call this the end of the dungeon section because I want to talk about something that's more, an observation about Tears of the Kingdom generally. But this is where the dungeon section ends. We're not talking about that dungeon. Not even going to say its name now anymore. This is the timestamp is here. So talking about the differences of the different areas of the world. So you're saying that ultimately you would have preferred to have a new map. And I respect that. Do you feel like because the depths and the Sky Islands both have very alien vibes from what you get on the surface, right? I mean, the Sky Islands have like a very, honestly, Skyward Sword-esque feeling, ancient aesthetic and vibe to them. And then the depths are, I mean, they've got kind of like Stranger Things upside down sort of stuff going on.
The depths feel like Metroid.
Depths do feel like Metroid. That's 100% true. Do you feel like those additions are enough to keep this game's experience fresh? I mean, like obviously we've already said that this game does feel fresh just by virtue of its suite of mechanics. But let's just talk about like the feel of the game world.
Yes. In a word, yes. I think it is enough. I don't feel like I'm lacking things to explore. Even the areas I know from Breath of the Wild, like I'm still interested in seeing what's different or finding these old characters. And then when I do actually have a hankering for exploring new lands, I can go underground and find some creepy, dark and look around, and I can, once I go down there, I happily explore for like 2 or 3 hours before I okay, time to go up for air. The Sky Islands are actually probably the place I'm spending the least amount of time because they're not contiguous. You can't just go from one Sky Island to another, unless you get crazy into building flying contraptions, I guess. So like ultimately it's like this weird peninsula from the land below for me. It's like I find a new sky tower that shoots me up in the air and I can explore the adjacent Sky Islands and then I have to move on. So they feel like an extension of exploring the normal overworld experience to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I definitely will say that just because of that, my experience with the sky has been much more segmented than anything else. And it really is completely contingent on if I happen to be near a Skyview tower, right? Because that's your fastest and easiest way to get back up there. Unless you've already been up there and you've gotten a shrine or something, and then you just want to strike out in a different direction. But I definitely see what you're saying.
Yeah, I assume that exploring like the far extents of the sky is going to require like, I don't know, getting a bunch of battery upgrades and making a plane or something.
Yeah,
I don't think everything is accessible from the Skyview towers.
I will say
it's definitely not.
Yeah, no. I will say I keep seeing these giant floating cubes in the sky, and at this point in the game, I haven't visited one. But I have an idea that those are the Lome labyrinths from Breath of the Wild that have just risen into the sky. And so I really want to go check one of those out and see what's going on.
You're partially correct.
Okay. All right. That answer intrigues me, and that makes me even more excited to go check one of those out. So I'm going to go do that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I haven't been to one of those yet either.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get out of here, Max, I want to pass it over to you and just say, if there was anything that you wanted to talk about on this episode, like some burning thoughts you had in the back of your mind that you got to hash it out, then this is your time to go nuts.
Well, there's so much. What do I want to pick for my last topic? I kind of wanted to talk about weapon durability changes, but that's less interesting. I'm less excited about that than the other thing I want to talk about, which is just I love the depths. Like I already talked a little bit about what the experience is like the first time I fell into one, and like had that growing realization of just how vast they were. But I think they're super cool because they're they're type of exploration experience that has not existed in a Zelda game before. I remember talking to Melora a few years ago after Breath of the Wild came out, and we were both like, we love this. We think it's the best game ever made. We just wish that there was an underworld. Like we felt like that was missing. And then when they revealed that they were going to reuse the same world from Breath of the Wild for this game, I remember thinking to myself, like, what could they actually do? What new dimensions could they add to the same world to make it interesting to explore again? And the stuff I came up with was the sky, because they'd already revealed the sky at that point, an underworld, and then the last thing I thought of was being able to go underwater. So like it's been kind of fun to see some like the prediction of the underworld come true here. But they went so far above and beyond what I ever imagined. Like when I imagined Underworld, I thought like there are dungeons and they go underground. I didn't imagine
like Shadow Temple-esque.
Yeah. Like they're just big cave systems. But I did not imagine this vast world where like they have a totally new system where you need to put down light, and you know, up above when you're exploring, it's all about getting to a high place, getting sight lines on objectives like shrines or temples or towns or stables, and then like going there, like, right? It's like getting high, picking a goal, walking towards it. But down here, it's like, it feels dangerous. It's kind of like this attrition economy because you can't really get new food and your maximum health is draining as you get hit. And, you know, you're kind of running out of like hammer items as you mine stuff. So it's all about like finding the next point of light and like getting the relief from the tension of exploring the darkness. And that's a very like it feels very inhospitable and alienating in a way that Zelda exploration very rarely does. That's why it feels like Metroid, because Metroid exploration is like that all the time. But like it really feels like you're in a hostile, like you almost feel like you're on another planet. Like I'm on Mars right now.
Yeah.
When you're down
and
there.
You know, one of the things that we talked about last week, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this, is one of the things that we said we loved so much about exploration in Breath of the Wild during that season was the way in which you were incentivized to explore, which is by line of sight, right? And specifically looking for Sheikah structures that are still orange. You know, that whole orange versus blue mechanic where blue means you've cleared it, orange means that you still have yet to visit it, and you can see them from most everywhere. And so players kind of like strike out in a direction in Hyrule trying to get to that point of orange light and just see what they find along the way. In the depths, you have kind of the inverse of that, right? Which is that you've got sensory deprivation, essentially. And then via, you know, a consumable item, via bright blooms, you can kind of traverse and you can kind of see light roots scattered around. But it makes for a very, very different kind of exploration in a space that has almost as many things to find. And I'm just curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty spot on observation. It's cool. Like it's valuable from an experience perspective that it contrasts so heavily with the overworld exploration, right? Like the fact that it feels different is really important to this game. Like there's such a big danger of exploring the underground feeling like, oh crap, it's all kind of the same shit. Just finding the same thing over and over again. I can see it from a mile away. I just got to go to it. But they did a good job of like varying the terrain, varying your line of sight, making you find like areas that like I've had that experience of like wandering into a section of the area and like being like, oh, this is not what I expected. Like, look at that thing, or look at that. The scale of it's different than I thought. Like, I'm trying not to be too specific here, but they managed to not fall into the trap of it feeling like a big flat plain underground.
Right, like
which I was a little bit afraid it would.
Well, so like the sensory deprivation is not the end all be all. Like it's not like you're just in an endless uniform space and you're just trying to make it from one light route to the next, right? Like there are structures, there is topography,
there's a lot of hidden things to discover, like so many. So many.
It has a cool feeling of conquering space that you don't usually get from Zelda. We get a little bit of that with unveiling the map above ground. Like once you reveal the map in an area, it feels a little bit like you've made it your own, right? But underground, it's really strong. Like you feel like you're in danger until you light up the space, and then suddenly you don't feel like you're in danger anymore. You like gradually conquering the underground is very appealing to me. I guess the last major note about all this is I love the way that the different layers of the world interconnect. Like when you're in the Sky Islands, you can find treasure maps. Have either of you found treasure maps yet?
Yes.
Found quite a few.
Okay, good. So, it puts a X down underground for you. So bam, suddenly your exploration of the sky yielded a new objective to go find in the underground. And when you're exploring the underground, you're finding light routes, and every light route corresponds to a shrine. So now oh, there's an objective above ground, above where this light route was. There's a shrine there that I need to go find. Mm-hmm. And vice versa. If you find a shrine, there's a light route down there. So they kind of do this thing where they introduce objectives on different layers of the world by exploring each layer. And then, of course, the literal interconnections in the form of the chasms and the sky towers.
Well, and even one layer past that is the way that you're incentivized to explore this space because it is inextricably tied to advancement in one of the game's core economies, which is the upgrading of your battery, right? Like the main way by which you do that is collecting zonite and resources tied to that economy. And the best place to do that is in the depths, right? Which is interesting, and I think was a really good decision, right? Because in a vacuum, like a space can be really cool in and of itself, and exploration can be really fun in and of itself. But if you've got this Zonai energy cell tied to one of the main mechanics of the game, which is your ability to create vehicles and use them to traverse from one place to the next, upgrading that cell. It kind of really requires you to spend some time down here. I think that was a really good decision.
Yeah. It makes me think of the Skyward Sword had something like this that wasn't as successful. Treasure chests down below that would lead you up to Sky Islands.
Right.
Or was it the other way around?
It was. Yeah, you would find goddess cubes on the surface, and then they would unlock chests on the Sky Islands, and that became the only reason to go to any of those.
Yeah.
They basically did not have as much of a rich. It was unbalanced.
Yes.
The sky world versus the bottom land were unbalanced there.
In a word, yes. Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, completely agree. And, personally can't wait to spend a little bit more time in the depths. I think that I've barely scratched the surface, and the amount of time that I spent down there has been very much tied to geographical areas, right? Like I spent some time on the Great Plateau, and there's obviously the little side quest on the Great Plateau that kind of bounces you down into the depths for a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then something sort of similar in another area that we haven't talked about yet. And
I think I just found that one.
Yeah. And what I really want to do is just spend some time down there just freewheeling, like without a goal, just checking things out and really trying to activate some light roots. And I think, like I said earlier, I think that's going to be priority numero uno for me after I discover the rest of the memories. But anyway, this has all been really great discussion. I think we've canvassed some really great stuff, and I can't wait until we're a little bit more in the clear in terms of, just being confident that we've all played most of the game up until a point and can discuss it in more depth. Obviously, we'll be analyzing it more critically way down the road when we're actually ranking it and reviewing it against other things. But for now, it's just all fun discovery. We're all on this journey together, and you really can't. There's no replacement for that. It's an amazing feeling, and I'm really glad that we could have you on to talk about it, Max.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thanks for having me, giving me a chance to, express all of my unending excitement for this new Zelda game.
We'll get back to it at another time. Just bottle some of that up and save it for a future date.
Oh yeah. I would have several more episodes this length in me if we wanted. So I'll wait for a year or two when you get to it.
Sounds good to me. Before we get out of here, Max, why don't you go ahead and drop social handles? Just let everybody know where they can follow you and all the different projects you're working on.
Yeah. Okay. So my personal game design blog is namelessquality.com. I don't know if I've ever dropped that one on the podcast.
I was about to say, before. That's totally new to even me.
You can find me on Twitter with just Max Nichols. That's Nichols. And of course, my major project, Zelda related right now, is Hyrule Interviews, which is HyruleInterviews.com or at Hyrule Interview without the S on Twitter, where I post daily quotes that I've unearthed from old interviews. And that's I think that's everything.
Awesome. I definitely highly recommend everybody go give Max a follow at all those places, and specifically recommend Hyrule Interviews because, honestly, I love the little screen grabs that you drop on Twitter with little snippets of conversations from Zelda devs of years past. I find them enlightening, and it's very fun, especially, I feel like a lot of times the language barrier between the Japanese studios and the Western world leads to us enjoying the things that they make, but not having a real good direct window into the thought processes that created those things. And so I really appreciate what you're doing because it's kind of shining a light on that and making it very accessible for everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. And of course, we're going to continue our Tears of the Kingdom coverage at least through next week. I think, Matt and I have talked about it. Pretty sure we're going to extend out a few more weeks at least.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Originally this was going to be a 4-episode thing, and I think where we're at right now is that nobody's exactly in the mood for us to go start talking about Phantom Hourglass just yet. So, which is, not to cast any aspersions on Phantom Hourglass unfairly, but it's Tears of the Kingdom time right now, and we all just want to live in that. So, I, speaking for myself, can't imagine pulling myself away from Tears of the Kingdom to go play anything else. So.
No, that's absolutely accurate.
Yep.
I'm very excited
Same.
to do a lot more Tears of the Kingdom playthroughs and chats. And I know we're definitely going to be doing a Discord Q&A, preferably a live Q&A if we can get that going. So if anybody's listening that would like to submit some questions and maybe hang out with us while we talk via our Discord, you can always access that through our Patreon. It's only $1 a month, and then you can sit in there with us and chat with some really excellent folks and submit some questions for episodes. But I know we're going to do that, and then we probably need to figure out what else we're going to do before we wrap up.
Yeah, someone should really sit down and plan this out, right?
I feel like that's probably our job. But if anyone has any ideas, like we're accepting of ideas.
Yeah, definitely. If you have suggestions for things you'd like to see talked about before we, move on from Tears of the Kingdom bonus content and back into regular stuff, then hit us up on our socials and on Discord if you're over there. Definitely open to suggestions because there's a lot of stuff to pick from right now, and we're pretty much open to all of it outside of the ending of the actual game, which we will not be talking about.
Yeah, we're not gonna force ourselves to beat this game quickly.
No, absolutely not. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like I really am just not wanting to rush through this right now. I want my first experience with this game to be organic and to be everything that it should be after a 6-year wait and all the buildup.
Yeah, absolutely. Same.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get out of here for the night. Max, great to talk to you, man. We'll catch up with you soon, okay?
Yeah.
All righty.
See you around.
Okay, if y'all enjoyed today's show and would like a little extra Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod and become a patron. If you've got no rupees, it's not a problem. 5-star Apple Podcast reviews are a great free way to support us. More reviews means that more people see our show. That makes us very happy Hylians. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sacred Realms Pod for updates on the podcast and for behind-the-scenes action. Sacred Realms will be back next Wednesday with more thoughts on The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. We'd love for you to play along with us and to share your thoughts on our social channels. Tears of the Kingdom can be played on the Nintendo Switch. In the meantime, may your hearts be full, may your arrows never miss. We'll catch y'all next time. Sacred Realms is an independent podcast production which is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Lyndon Willoughby. Our music comes from Zelda and Chill by Mikkel and is graciously provided to us by Mikkel and Game Chops Records. Zelda and Chill is available to stream on Spotify or to purchase directly from GameChops.com. Finally, our thanks go to Nintendo for creating such exceptional and innovative experiences.
Bye!